We also have it here, Ma'am Elmera Banal. Good morning po. And Ma'am Janessa A. Dayono from Central Philippine State University. We also have here Sir Paul Ramsey Belencion from Barotac Nuevo, Iloilo, the football capital of the Philippines. Good morning, everyone, from Ma'am Jinky Donesa. God bless, watching from Iloilo State College of Fisheries. So I think it would be ideal for us now to provide you first of the rules to follow. Again, I would like to remind you that your microphone should be muted at all times. Aside from that, we also have the following rules to follow in the whole duration of this conference. So to those who are new here in our session, we have 1, you are expected to open your camera as it is recommended. 2, always mute your microphone. 3, use headphones or earphones. 4, find a seat or location that is comfortable and well lighted. 5, it is advised to wear business or smart casual attire. 6, finish the whole virtual conference and complete the evaluation form for you to get your certificate. 7, always direct your concern through personally message or PM on our page or our email address so we can provide answer to your concern. We are now on the second and last day of have a discussion on recalibrating research for the new normal using experimental design from 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. and research publication in peer-reviewed journals and research presentation from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. We are presently live here in Zoom again and in YouTube at the official channel of POMMI. We also have a delayed telecast in Facebook at the official Facebook page of PISI21. Yesterday, we had a very enlightening and great discussion, or discussions coming from our 2 equally dynamic speakers. Just to give you a brief recap, on our first day, we had Dr. Gilbert Pascua Kabilangan Magulo Jr. on a topic, conducting methodology review for qualitative research design, and Dr. Leonilo Capulso on a topic, using joint display analysis in mixed method research or MMR. I think we are all set now. So, to formally start our conference, may I request everyone to be in silence for the prayer. Let us put ourselves in the presence of the Lord. In the name of the Father, the Son, of the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord, we are virtually gathered for second day of our conference. We thank you for the opportunity of allowing us to make this event possible, despite the many challenges surrounding us in the conduct of this event. We glorify you for every person that is with us today. May you guide our speakers so that they would be able to effectively impart their God-given wisdom to all of us. Continue to bless them as they are to share their expertise to everyone who needs them. We pray, O Lord, that the COVID-19 cases will finally diminish and we may be able to defeat this pandemic. This we ask to Christ our Lord. Amen. Again, good morning, everyone. Before I formally introduce to you our speaker, I would like everyone listening to the different platforms we have to again effectively and responsibly use the chat function in raising your questions. You can write your questions or insights while our speaker is having his discussion, but expect it to be answered during the question and answer portion. We will be having the open forum after the speaker's presentation. And to those who would like to personally ask questions, you may also press the raise hand button and we will be notifying you ahead if you're recognized. Thank you. It's time for me now to formally introduce to you our speaker. Our speaker for this morning is a multi-award winning senior high school teacher, professor, and speaker, and researcher from Marilao, Bulacan. He is a senior high school teacher and school research coordinator of Graceville National High School and is also affiliated as Professor 1 of Colegio de San Gabriel, Arcangel. He has obtained his degree Bachelor of Science in Biology and Diploma in Teacher Education at the Colegio de San Gabriel, Arcangel in 2014. He has finished his degree in Master of Arts in Education, major in Biology at the Bulacan State University, Malolos campus in 2017. His Master of Arts in Teaching Science at the University of Caloocan City, Camarin campus in 2020 and is presently taking Master in Education, major in Educational Leadership at the Colegio de Dagupan. He was recognized as the 2021 Outstanding Teacher in Research by International Edu Conclave and Awards, Global Outstanding Teacher given by the Leadership in Education Academy and Development Philippines, Global Leader Award and Global Educators Award in Research by the International Journal of Advanced Multidisciplinary Studies and Beyond Books publication. Our speaker was able to present and publish researches and news articles in several international journals and publications. He is presently the designated editor-in-chief of International Journal of Discoveries and Innovation in Applied Sciences. He is also a part of the editorial board of the European Journal of Agricultural and Rural Education and editorial board of International Review of Social Sciences Research. He also authored and co-authored several books, namely General Biology 1, Inquiries, Investigation, and Immersion, How to Write and Publish a Dissertation, How to Write and Publish Your Thesis, Practical Guide for Students and Teachers, Practical Research 2, Quantitative Research, and Understanding the End-to-End Praxis of Quantitative Research from Scratch to Paper Presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Professor Resty C. Samosa. Good morning, sir.
Okay. So the topic that I going to discuss today is all about recalibrating the research for the new normal through experimental design. I'm also going to discuss how we utilize different mobile application which deals with the experimental research in terms of statistical treatment so that you can utilize different techniques on data analysis and sampling design. So that we all know that the experimental design is considered to be the most powerful type of research in determining causation among the variables. It means it already been discussed in the previous researches and webinars in this group that it deals with the variables or experimental factors that deliberately manipulated so that their effects to the test materials can be isolated for measurement and analysis. It means that it is the blueprint of a procedure that enables the researcher to test the hypothesis by reaching a valid conclusion on the relationship of the variables of the study. It's primarily allowed the measurement of the size or the size of the error from the statistical conclusion could be made. Then we all know that the experimental research have the following three conditions that you must be met in order to establish cause and effects, because experiment pertaining to test of difference or the test of cause and effect. So that the first is the causation. It means it is the change in the cause that must be related to effect. For example, if you're going to implement an innovation or a strategy in your classroom, it must be related on the effect on the student academic performance, or if you're going to utilize strategic intervention materials to a particular communication behavior or communication style, if you're referring to cohesion, cooperation. Another one is the temporal precedence. The cause must be precedes the effect of a particular innovation or strategy that you're going to implement in your experimental research. Another one is the no plausible alternative explanation. The cause must be only explanation for the effects, not totally in any types of types or necessary undetermined variables. So that the choice of the design for a particular experiment is largely determined by the following factors. These are some of the factors that I consider in the new normal. The first one will be the nature and the objectives of your study. If your objectives of your study or the nature of your study is pertaining to test of the effectiveness of a particular innovation or particular strategy in your classroom, or it refers to innovation in terms of the growth of a plant, or by utilizing fertilizer or a natural fertilizer, you're pertaining to the a nature of your objectives of your study. It means in determining your research or a particular experiment, you must consider your objectives of your study. Another one is the kinds of experimental factor that you're going to involve. What experimental factors that you need to encompass in your research study? The next one is the environmental condition under which the study will be conducted. These are referring to the conditions of the nature of the seriousness of the problem, or the problem that you're going to implement or you're going to diagnose during your experimental study. You need to identify the seriousness of the problem as part of your purposive sampling. For example, your study is focused on the effectiveness of a virtual laboratory, so that your participants must be considered that your participants have a poor laboratory competencies. And some of the condition or environmental condition must be considered in the new normal is the inadequate materials at home, so that you're going to utilize mobile virtual laboratory as your environment or your treatment in your study. What are the considerations on satisfactorily complying with the requirements of scientifically valid investigation? The first one, a research problem with the factors under the study are carefully identified and defined. Another one is the specific experimental factor to study. You need to diagnose the specific experimental factor that you need to study. Another one is the method of controlling other factors following the law of single variables. Remember that the single variables, if two situations are alike in every respect and one element is added, modified, or removed, or any difference that develop is effect of the added, modified, or remove the elements. From this principle, some modification has been developed to make the field of experimentation more elaborate, comprehensive, and functional. It means the way you control your factors in your experiment must be considered the law of single variables. Another one is the availability of the suitable test materials. In your experimental research or in a quasi-experimental research, you need to consider the test validity of the validity of your materials that you're going to implement in your innovation or your study. You need to make an innovation on the requirements of the materials that you're going to implement in your study, because these are some of the consideration in experimental research. Provision for an adequate data gathering program using appropriate measures and tests. Right now in the new normal, we have a problem in terms of data gathering procedure, but because of the technological innovation and technological enhancement by a researcher, we can utilize Google Form, Zoom, Google Meet for focus group discussions and others. And the validity of the test can be easily validated using SPSS, MS Word, MS Excel, and others. But in my session, I'm going to discuss some of the statistical measures that can be utilized, either it is offline. Carefully and satisfactory for a more study necessary to verify or advance the finding of the experiment. It means you need to carefully diagnose some of the related literature or study that can be verify your findings of your study. These are the some of the checklists on designing an experimental procedure according to Creswell 2018. These are some of the questions that you need to focus with deals with the experimental study. The first one will be, who are the participants in the study? The participants of the study must be identified based on their competencies and based on their ability to join with your study. Because in experimental research, we need to select your participants based on the purpose of your study. What is the population to which the result the participants will be generalized? Where the participants selected, what a random selection method used? These are some of the considerations that you need to identify in an experimental procedure. Another one is, what is the dependent variables or the outcome of the variables that you're going to implement in your study, and how it will be measured? It will be measured before and after an experiment, or it is a pretest-posttest design, or it is utilized quasi-experimental design. What is the treatment condition? How was it is operational? Will be available for convenience in the experiment? How will be measured? What experimental research design will be used? What would a visual model of the design look alike? These are some of the checklists that are provided by Creswell and Creswell 2018. And these are some of the procedures or steps involving the experimental research according to Samosa et al. 2021. The first one is the survey. You're going to survey the literature related to your problem. Why? Because we need to identify the research gap in terms of methodological or in terms of the findings of the study, to come up with your present condition or the present seriousness of the problem, to make a statistical evidences from the recent literature and study. Another one is to identify and define the problem based on the nature of the phenomenon that you encounter in your classroom or in the field or in the community. Next is the formulating a problem hypothesis and defining the basic terms and the variables. This is the starting of hypothesis is important step in experimental research. They suggest that the antecedent condition or phenomenon we are pertaining to the independent variables is related to the occurrent another conditions, phenomenon or event or effect on particularly it is dependent variable. To test the hypothesis that the experimental attempt to control all the conditions except the independent variables which he or she manipulated or the researcher manipulated. Then the researcher observed the effect on the dependent variables presumably because This refers to the conceptual framework wherein which the experiment is conducted. This four involved the following procedures that you need to follow. The first one is to identify all non-experimental variables that may be contaminated the experiment and determine how to control the following them. You as a researcher must be interested in finding the effects of two particular, for example, teaching methodology on achievement in physics. The pure effect of this teaching methodology may get contaminated because of the some extra coaching in physics at home or some competition held in your schools, either it is virtual or virtual competitions. Another one in considering an experimental plan is the select of your research design. If it is referring to a true experimental or pre-experimental or a quasi-experimental. The next one is to select a sample subject of the given representation of your population. And the outline of the procedure of collecting your data, possibly to conduct the pilot of your trial run of your tests, and state your statistical hypotheses. So that what are the characteristics of an experimental research? Most of the time, these are the some of the experimental research characteristics. The first one will be the statistical equivalence of the subject in the different group. This is the first characteristics of experimental research. Prior to the conduct of your experiment, the researcher has to ensure that the two groups to be compared are equivalent in terms of the nature of their participants, in terms of the nature of the problem or the seriousness of the competence of the subject, and in any particular performance, the performance must be no attribute to the difference in the group. It must be considered a randomization of the subject in terms of the methods often used to achieve the statistical equivalence. Nevertheless, the matching of the subject or the group can also be used as your purpose. Another one is the comparison of the two or more groups of sets of conditions. In these characteristics, experimental research suggests that at least two groups or conditions which can be compared are needed. This is because the intended experiment is to compare the effects or the condition of one group with the effect of the different condition has on the second group. Thus, in the experimental research, at least two groups or conditions are required for the comparison to be made. Most of the time, we have two groups of respondents or conditions. But some higher researchers or research consider also more than two groups of respondents or conditions.
Ano bang ginagawa mo?
Another one is the direct manipulation of at least one independent variables. This is the most important or distinct feature of the experimental research, the new normal. The manipulation in this study means that the researcher decide upon or control the group of the subjects that will be received the treatment or experimental condition. If this condition is not present, then the study is not true experiment. Another one is the measurement of each dependent variables. In this characteristics, the measurement of the independent variables means that the experimental research is focused on the things that can be assigned a numerical value. When the result of the study cannot be measured or quantified, then it is not experimental anymore. Another one is the use of the inferential statistics. We all know that inferential statistics is used in making a probability of statement about the outcomes of your study. The use of inferential statistics is important to allow the researcher to generalize the results of the parallel groups of the population of the subject. Most of the time, it is more on the test of difference and the test of effect of a particular innovation or strategies. Next is the next one will be the direct manipulation of at least one independent variables, or most of the time, the control exogenous variables. This is the most important features of the experimental study, which is the unique experimental study that there is a determined effort to make sure that the exogenous variables can be controlled, provided the plausible rival of the hypothesis to be explained in the result of your study. So that these are some, after you identify the characteristics of the experimental research, we need to discuss some of the types of experimental research. The first one, we all know that the free experimental design, it is not possible to show cause and effect most of the time, because the independent variables does not vary. The experimental or the control group are not compromised by equivalent or random selections of individuals or participants. So that what are the example of the pre-experimental design? Most of the time, these are the one-shot experimental case study, the one-group pretest-posttest design, and the static group comparison. So that we first focus on the one-shot experimental case study. It is the most primitive type of experiment that might be that are most of the time it's referring to research. An experimental treatment, which represents RTX in my talk, it's introduced, and then an observation or OBS is typically an assessment of some sort. It's made to determine what effect of the treatment may have. It means in this type of experiment, you have to introduce an experimental procedure, or you're going to introduce innovation. Then you make an observation on the assessment that you employ in your study. So that this is the group one, then you have a treatment, then you're going to observe. So that this is a one-shot experimental case study. In this one, you do not have a control group. It means wala kang comparison. There is no comparison with the other group. Another one is the one group pretest-posttest design. In this design, a single group will undergo a pre-experimental assessment. Then it's administered experimental treatment, and finally is assessed again after the treatment. It means there is a pre-test in this particular design of the pre-experimental, so that you're going to undergo pre-test. Then after that, you're going to administer experimental treatment or innovation. Then you're going to observe what will be the effect of the innovations. Next is the in one group pretest-posttest design, you can identify some of the there is no comparison of the group, because you have only one group of participants. Next is the static group comparison. In this one, an experimental group is exposed in a particular treatment. The control group is not. After the treatment, both groups are assessed and their respective performance compared. In this design, however, no attempt is made to observe equivalent group or event to examine the group to determine whether they are similar before the treatment. Thus, we have no way of knowing if the treatment actually caused and any observed difference between the group. So that this one, they have two groups. Then the group one undergo a treatment. Then the group two, there is no treatment. Then you're going to observe what will be the effect of this particular innovation. But in this type of the static group comparison, there is no way in knowing the treatment is actually caused any observed difference between the group. Next, we go to the true experimental design. We all know that the true experimental design, in contrast with the previous type of design, it's very simple. In the three design, it's very simple as described as experimental design. Offer a considerable degree or control as a result of the greater internal validity. The first three of the four design that we're going to discuss in this webinar share things in common. This is pertaining to the subject or the other unit of the study are randomly assigned. Because in this design, there is a randomization or a random assignment. So that what are the types of the true experimental design? There are control group pretest-posttest design. Another one is the Solomon for group design, the control group post-test only design, and the within the subject design. Then after that, we're going to make a sample of an experiment that I presented in a conferences. So that the first one will be the control group pretest-posttest design. In this design, the subject or the unit of the study or the member of a particular plant or animal species. For example, if you are biologists or agriculturists, you're going to have a random assignment to either an experimental group or from the experimental group or to the control group. So that your experimental group is observed or you're going to assess as subjected to experimental treatment, then observe again. The control group is isolated from any influence of the experimental treatment. It means that the control group does not give any treatment. It is simply observed both the beginning and at the end of the experiment. So that in this type of design, there is a randomization assignment. You randomly select the participants of your study or your subject. Then in the experimental group, you're going to make an innovation in terms of your experimental group. Then you make a treatment from that. Then you're going to observe the difference between the core of the two groups of your subject. Next is the Solomon 4 groups design. In the Solomon 4 groups design, one potential problem in proceeding this design is the process of assessing the participants before administering the experimental treatment. Because in the first Solomon 4 group design, it may be in and itself influence how participants respond to the treatment. For example, the first assessment is to increase the people motivation. It makes them want to benefit from any intervention and then receive assistance or receive another instant or reactivity effect. To address the questions, what the effect of DAS pre-testing had, Solomon 1949 proposed an extension of the control group pretest-posttest design that involves the 4 groups. So that in the control group pretest-posttest design, Solomon added another groups. So that this is the design for the Solomon 4 group design. So that this one is the pretest. This is referring to the control group pretest-posttest design, this one. Then Solomon added another group, which is the group 3 and 4, so that there is no treatment here, but there is no observable pre-test pala. It's the pre-test. Then there is a innovation here. Then you're going to observe after the experimental treatment. Then in the control group, in the group 4, there is no treatment, there is no pre-testing, but you need to undergo observations from that. Next is the control group post-test only design. To determine the effect of the treatment when pre-testing cannot or should not occur, uses the last 2 groups in the Solomon group design. The random assignment to the group is critically critical to maximum the group of equivalents. So that in this design, there is a random assignment that the group 1 and group 2, then in terms of the group 1, there is a treatment that you're going to implement, then you're going to make a observation, or you're going to undergo a post-test design. In this design, there is no pre-test, or there is no pre-assessment. Group 2, there is no treatment, then you're going to undergo post-test design. Next is the within subject design. To compare the relative effect of the different treatment for the subject of the same participants, it is useful when only effect of each treatment are temporary and localized. Most of the time, this is the localized experimental design within the subject, because you're going to select your participants based on the criteria of the seriousness of the objectives of your study. So that there is a treatment, then you're going to make an observation from that. You have two treatment. You're going to have a two treatment. For example, you're going to implement a strategy or methods of teaching. For example, this is brain-based teaching strategy, and this is referring to inquiry design, so that you're going to make the same group, then you're going to have a observation from that or post-test from that. Next is the most common experimental design that utilized before the new normal is the quasi-experimental research design. In the quasi-experimental research design, this design used to identify the difference between the two or more groups to explain causation. This allowed the researcher or more to control and make assumptions about the causation and the implications of the findings. It is also useful when the researcher wants to study a particular groups in which the group member cannot be randomly assigned. So that what are the types of quasi-experimental research design? There is a randomized control group pretest-posttest design. And there is a simple time series design. Then there is a control group time design. Then there is a reversal time series design and alternating treatment design. Just wait. Then another one is the multiple baselines design. These are some of the common quasi-experimental research design that implemented before the new normal. But some of these can be also utilized even though there is a new normal of education. So the first one will be the non-random control group pretest-posttest design. It means in this design, there is a random assignment also. Then describe a compromise between the static group comparison and the pretest-posttest design in the previous discussion. Like the static group comparison, it's involved two groups in which the participants have not been randomly assigned, but it's incorporated test-posttest design. It means without randomly assignment, the group membership or the group of the subject, there is no guarantee that that these two groups have a similar in every respect of the variety of the experimental treatment or interventions. No guarantee that any difference between the group are due to entirely chances. So that in this one, there is a two groups. So that this is the group 1. Then you have to undergo pretest. Then you make a intervention or innovation or experimental treatment so that you undergo post-test. The group 2, there is a control group so that test. Next is the simple time series design. It is the simplest form of time series design consists of making a series of observation. It means you have a series of observation in the dependent variables of the several occasions, so that there is a series of observation or assessment that you're going to implement. If it is substantial to change the observation in the second series of observation, comparison of the first series, we might be reasonably conclude that the cause of the changes has to factor introduced into the system. So that this one, you have a series of a pre-test and examinations, then you have a treatment, then you have a series of a examination or post-testing. Next is the control group time series design. In the variation of the time series design, two groups are observed over a period of time, but one group or a control does not receive any experimental design. In the previous one, there is a treatment, there is a continuous pre-testing and some of a examinations. Then this one will have a control group. So that the control group does not give any innovations or any treatment or experimental treatment. Next is the multiple baseline design. To show the effect of the treatment by indicating a different times of different group of individuals, you're going it's perhaps that the different setting of the individual, it involves of tracking of two or more groups or individual over the time, or tracking the single individual in two or more settings. It means there is a two more settings that you're going to implement during this one, so that you have to have observation, you have a pre-testing, so that there is a what do you mean by that? There is a different types of individual settings. Then you undergo pre-testing in the group 1 and also group 2. Then in the group 1, you're going to implement experimental or innovation. Then you're going to make observation, then another innovations or experimental treatment, then you're going to observe. So that this is a multiple baseline design because you implement a two treatment for a group. Then in the group 2 or in the control group, only one group has an implementation of one experimental treatment. So that these are some of the threats in the experimental research. In terms of the history, you need to identify you need to consider the history, maturation, regression, selection, mortality, and the diffusion. How it is happened. In the history, because it's time passes during the experiment, you need to duly identify the beyond the experiment. The researcher can have a both experimental and control group with the same external events. In maturation, the participants in the experiment may mature or change during the experiment, thus the influence the results. Because the implementation of the experimental innovations or strategies can change the results of your study. Then the regressions is the participants with extreme score are selected for experiment. So that this is referring to how you're going to identify your participants in terms of the extreme scores. Naturally, their score will be probably changed during the experiment. The score over the time regress towards the mean. Then the selections is pertaining to have you selected who have a certain characteristics in terms of the predisposed them to have a certain outcomes or the writer itself. That the mortality, participants drop out during the experiment due to many possible reasons. So that we need to choose your participants that most of them have continue joining your experimental research. Then other are some of the factors to be considered in the threats for internal validity of your experimental research. Then what are the external validity of your research? Your interactions of the selection of your treatment, the interactions of the setting of your settings and your treatment, and the interaction of history and treatment. These external factors are essential because it can also affect the results of your study and the generalization of your findings. So that this is an example of a experimental research that I implemented during the COVID-19 pandemic. The utilization of the mobile virtual laboratory as an innovative strategy to improve learners' achievement, attitude, and learning environment in teaching chemistry. So that I implemented mobile virtual laboratory as part of my innovation as innovative strategy. So that the concern of the context of rationality focus on the chemistry. So that in my previous study, it seems that the drawing topic by the learners because of difficulties to create an abstract concept that are commonly encountered in the subject area, chemistry. I also observed that the student in high school chemistry classes are often memorized problem-solving techniques rather than comprehending the chemical concept involved in the laboratories. So that I also observed in chemistry that many students, according to research, do not grasp a basic chemistry concept according to Kamisan and NOR 2013. From that, students scientifically misconceived notion perceived from the grade school through the university and even beyond. This is according to Scoviller and Fainava P 2010. So that from that, many scholars and instructors and science educators have regarded chemistry as a challenging topic for students due to the abstract nature of many chemical principle, classroom teaching style, and lack of teaching aid and the language of chemistry. And all this lead to lack of understanding and confusion among the students from the elementary students to university. So that I also observed some of the attitude of student towards chemistry. So the chemistry attribute among the middle and early high school students have been shown to be declining in comparison to the previous schooling experience before the COVID-19. Students who are lost in interest in science are likely to study the subject in higher education are less likely to pursue career in science. Then I also observed some of the phenomenon in chemistry laboratory. That the laboratory experiments are often compared to the cookbook in which the student directly follow instructions without questioning them in order to make them due to the misunderstanding about what inquiry is and how inquiry activities are implemented according to Demille and Avel 2010. From that, the virtual laboratory is intended to stimulate real experiment. Laboratories available through the mobile phones can utilize less instructional time, reduce the reliance of complex hazardous and costly equipment, and allow students to experience high investigations. It's offer an engaging instructional medium of one to which many students of the digital age are well informed in terms of the virtual laboratory. So that I created a research questions in terms of what is the attitude of the learners as exposed to mobile virtual laboratories as an innovative strategy in teaching chemistry as environment, teacher support, task orientation, investigation, and differentiation. So, and also examine the pretest post-test results. Then the test of difference between that exists between the pretest and post-test result of using mobile virtual laboratory. From that, I implemented one group pretest post-test design because most of my students experiencing a difficulty in terms of learning laboratory experiences in chemistry. I selected 30, 11 grade 11 technical, vocational, and livelihood of the senior high school, and also adapt survey in terms of learning attitude and learning environment. Then the methods I implemented, I also made a self-made pretest post-test, and I also validated that using test-retest reliability, which compromises 0.83, 0.813. And I also implemented descriptive and inferential statistics. Test of difference is I utilized t-test and mean and as part of my statistical treatment. So that from this one, the result revealed that most of my students have exhibit a positive attitude on inquiry, which have 4.35, enjoyment have a high positive attitude, so that the overall result is high positive. Then in terms of the level of enjoyment, level of learning environment, most of them are high positive in terms of the innovations. Then in terms of the mean difference, in the pretest, we got 79.2 against the post-test 87.53, so that the students gain 40.05 in terms of their mean gain. Then in terms of the test of difference, we reject the null hypothesis that there is no significant difference. Most of them have a significant difference in terms of the pretest and post-test. So that some of the conclusion, the utilization of this innovative strategy, mobile virtual laboratories in teaching chemistry show a learner have a strong positive attitude. Learners have a strong positive learning environment when exposed to the innovative strategies, and have a higher mean in terms of the post-test than the pretest. Then from this one, I have created, these are the published journal in the International Journal of Multidisciplinary Applied Business and Education. Then after this one, I'm going to share with you Sir, can I share my phone for statistical treatment that can be utilized offline in experimental research, sir?
Yes, sir. You can do it, sir.
Sir, I can utilize my phone because only the host can share this meeting, sir.
Okay, can we have the name of your cell phone account, sir?
Resty Samosa. Judge Samosa Resty.
Okay, sir. We are presently working on it, sir.
So that the teachers offline mobile app.
Okay, sir. You are already provided of a host power, sir?
No, sir. This way. This application can be utilized by the students and teachers if you have a difficulties in utilizing SPSS and Excel, because these applications can be used during your comprehensive exam. And most of my research, I'm currently conducting a research on the effectiveness of mobile offline data analysis that can be utilized by the students and also the teachers. Most of the time, most of that novice teacher researcher have a problem in terms of data analysis.
Okay, sir, you may try it again, sir.
Yes, sir. Okay, can I share my screen now?
It's
You
already
can
visible,
download
sir.
this one. You can download this one you can download first muna. Kahit 10 pesos lang na pang FB, you can utilize this one. The Analyze Stat. This one, the Analyze Stat. Yan, this one. You can download in the Google app. Then, I'm going to utilize this one. This Analyze Stat can be used offline. There's no internet connectivity that you can use during your data analysis. And this one, pwede kang gumamit any higher statistical treatment. Yan. Then, for example, I going to use one-way ANOVA. Then, one-way ANOVA, for example, I utilize continuous data. Then, from this one, you can type based on the group or groups na gusto mo. Example, this is group 1, group 2, group 3. Pwede ka na mag-type dyan. You can encode that. And you can add columns. You can add rows. Yan. Infinite yung number of your data that you can utilize, or either 1,000, you can add data here. Before, I have a data naman. For example, this one. I have the data this one. So that meron akong group 1, group 2, group 3. For example, mga 5 lang nilagay ko. Then, from that, you can analyze the data. You can click Analyze. Then, you can choose either 0.05 or 0.01. Then, from that, you can analyze na. Then, in this application, you do not need to use a statistical table because sinasabi na dito ng app if it's the null hypothesis is accepted or rejected. Based on this one, false ang nakalagay. So that, ibig sabihin, you're going to accept the null hypothesis. Kapag false, you're going to accept the null hypothesis. Kapag true, there is a significant difference. Then in this one, pwede siyang gumamit ng graphs. Yan. At pwede nyo palang in this one, pwede mo pala siyang i-discuss in your chapter 3 of your thesis, the meaning of one-way ANOVA. At ang maganda rin dito, you can share it. You can share this one to your by Facebook or via Gmail. Ganun po siya pwedeng gamitin. Oh, hindi for example, pipili ako ng ibang data. For example, gamitin ko is the Pearson R. Continuous data. Any types of data pwede kang gumamit. Yan po lahat. Pati rin po ang iba, you can utilize descriptive statistics. For example, meron tayong scores. Example, we have a scores here. Gamitin ko yung data ko. This one. You can analyze this one, then nandiyan yung resulta. No need for a researcher or novice teacher researcher to compute. Then you can share this to your students in terms of data analysis. The result of this data analysis is also the same with the SPSS and Excel and higher statistics. Another one, I also going to share with you the sample size. Siyempre, we have a problem in terms of the sample size. So that this one is the sample size calculator. You can utilize this one offline. For example, you have a 300 respondents. So that you need to identify randomly. Pwede ka pumili in terms of the confidence. Gusto nyo is the 90% of the confidence level of your sample size. Then the precision is 95%. For example, 95% then. So that the sample size needed for your study in experimental research is 151 only. Another one, I can also utilize citation maker. Kasi we have a problem in citation in the new normal because we have a 7th edition. So that you can make a APA, for example, APA for journal. You can write your surname, first name pala, sorry. First name, for example, journal is the educational research. Example lang. Volume, for example, volume 2. Number 5. School year, for example 1. The article title is Mobile Virtual Laboratory in Chemistry. Example pages 130. Then yan na, makaka-create na siya. Ganyan lang po siya. It can be easily for student to identify. Another one is, syempre, students have a problem in terms of students and teachers have a problem in terms of your literature and study. You can download also a research tool. This is research tool. Then you can select any of the following journals or search research tool feature in your study. That's all. Thank you po.
Again, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Resty Samosa on his discussion about recalibrating research for the new normal using experimental design. I am personally interested with the discussion of Sir Resty Samosa, and the discussion was easy to absorb the fact that he was able to provide us an example. We have also here positive feedback, especially from people who are new to the apps provided by Sir Samosa. I am personally new also to analyze stat. And we have here a question. We have here one reaction. Statistician left the group. Thanks for the apps and big help. Actually, yes, we were provided, the way I look at it, Sir Samosa, we were provided of different forms of statistical tools, but the struggle normally for a researcher is on how or when to use those tools in a research, or to use those ano tawag natin diyan, yung mga statistical analysis necessary in the making of their own research. Okay, so we have Sir Samosa, I'm quite curious, is the analyze stat generating automatically discussions based
Uh,
on the based on how you've encoded data?
the analyst stat give us a statistical evidence, but the discussion in terms of a written, madali na siya kasi all the data that you needed is given, and the test of difference and the test of relationship nakalagay naman doon kung true or false. Kapag false, there is no significant difference. Kapag true, there is significant difference.
Okay, so a confirmation na napapadali yung ginagawa or gagawin natin when we are too involved in experimental research. So in my case, for example, as a social science teacher, we do not normally venture into this kind of approach. But although I know as an educator, nagagamit din natin itong experimental kind of approach. Anyway, again, it's time for us to proceed now with the open forum. Nakatapo na po ako ng tanong, and I would like to throw it also to you to be given the opportunity to ask any question to Sir Resty Samosa. Again, we will cater to as many questions as possible depending on the availability of our time. We will select questions raised by our participants here in Zoom and in YouTube. And to those who will be tapped to ask questions, I would like you to introduce yourself first, the institution where you are affiliated with, and your question. To those who would like to remain anonymous, for example, you may also join us at slido.com by using that code number 112251. Okay? Again, we will wait for your questions to appear. Allow me to read some of the feedbacks you have here, Sir Resty. We have thank you, sir, for a very fruitful sharing of the topic. According to Sir Renato, as Jude. Yes, sir.
Offline and some for quantitative research. This is one of my current research on the utilization of the mobile offline data quantitative research, so that in this platform we can create an innovation in terms of data analysis, in terms of experimental or either qualitative research.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Again, we have here those who are already asking for a copy of your presentation. Again, Sir Resty was able to forward us already a PDF copy of his discussion or of his presentation. We will send it to you after the conference together with 3 other topics presented in our conference. So again, antay-antay lang po tayo. We have those who are thanking you, sir. We have here Ma'am Michelle. Thank you so much, sir, for giving us a comprehensive insight about the topic. Thank you also for introducing the tools. Again, we are waiting here for your questions to appear. I guess we have one question kanina. It was like more of a confirmation. And I would like you to provide an answer, sir, to the question of Sir Lito Hilidon. Is experimental research qualitative or quantitative? Can you have a confirmation, sir?
The experimental research in nature are quantitative in research. Quantitative siya. But me is a is a mixed method researcher. I integrate in the quasi-experimental or a true experiment a qualitative evidence to strengthen the nature of the data that I implemented in my study. But experimental research are quantitative in nature.
Okay, thank you, sir. We have here a question from Sir Neil Ryan Ado. Prior to that, he is greeting us. Hi, sir. Thank you for adding up our knowledge on experimental research. My interest was caught by Solomon for group design. This design involves several observations as shown in the figure earlier. My question is, how will the observations be compared to determine the intervention's effectiveness? Okay, Ma'am Susana Inpe is raising her hand. We are recognizing you, Ma'am, but we will have you right after Sir's answer to the question of Sir Neil Ryan Ado.
Okay. In the for Solomon, you can make a different assessment. For example, the pre-test, then after that you can make another test to strengthen the innovation or strategy. Most of the time in my study right now I conducting a quasi-experimental and as for group Solomon. I implemented that in my study right now. I give different several assessment to strengthen the experimental treatment because Solomon is good talaga siya in terms of the design that in doing your experimental research. But most of the time, it is very good pa rin in terms of the quasi-experimental. For me as researcher, quasi-experimental is good than Solomon for group design because you need to undergo different assessment. Napakahirap yun ngayon sa new normal to implement different assessment for Solomon. And remember, you have 4 groups. You need to identify the seriousness of the problem in terms of the participants to join your study. Kaya I go to the quasi-experimental research.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now let us have a live question from one participant here in Zoom. Again, ma'am, I would like you to introduce yourself first, the institution where you are affiliated with, and your question. Ma'am Susana, you're recognized. I think Ma'am Susana is no longer with us. So I think it would be ideal for us to cater a question here in slido.com from Jackie from Western Institute of Technology, Iloilo. Sir, can you provide tips on how to go about with experimental study, like the conduct of experiments from wet labs to remote conditions, given the pandemic restrictions?
Honestly, this question is very good because I'm biologist in my profession. Currently, most of my students in BS Bio and MedTech currently doing this wet lab in remote conditions. But there is a condition from that in terms of the ethical considerations of the materials that you can use. Pwede naman siya. You can do that. But we need to discuss to your student some of the consideration in wet labs and dry labs. Kasi syempre sa bahay sila, we need to consider that. But for me, it's good naman to develop an innovation to effectively instruct our students on the wet labs and the dry labs in remote conditions. Kaya most of my students have their own place, but syempre may mga estudyante tayo talaga na maliit ang bahay. Kailangan i-consider pa rin yun. Kaya nga I utilize
Okay, thank you, sir. We have it here, another question appearing in slido.com from Engineer Noel Benavides of SSU. When do we use the Solomon 4 group design? Is this more effective than the quasi approach? What do you think, sir?
Kanina I answered this one that most of the time I utilize quasi-experimental. But because of the new normal, we can utilize Solomon for groups design. But we consider also some the limitation of the subject, the number of subjects. Kasi if it is experimental, if it is experimental in nature, we need to consider the participants of your study or the subject have purposefully selected. Then, syempre, we need to consider yung time constraint natin. Kaya nga po ang Solomon for groups design, it can be utilized if you have different innovations in your classrooms and how it is effective. Pero syempre, kapag for Solomon, in terms of instruction, teaching instruction, medyo mahirap. But in terms of true experiment, in terms of yung mga laboratory experiment, it is good. Ay mas lalo kapag engineer, we have also a for Solomon group design in terms of the materials that can be utilized in your field of your expertise, ma'am or sir.
Okay, thank you, sir. So we have here a question from Matildo Ermi Lux. In research of the new normal, how can we ensure the authenticity of the response of the respondents? In other words, paano natin malalaman na sila talaga yung nag-answer ng questionnaire using the Google form only? What do you think of that, sir?
For me kasi, sabi ko nga, there is you need to validate the answer of your students by utilizing qualitative evidences. Kaya kapag ako nag-experimental ako, I also inserted qualitative evidences or using a interview to strengthen the validity of my quasi-experiment or experiments. Kasi if it is go to the Google form only in terms of that your achievement tests, medyo mahirap. Kaya we need to consider also the approach of qualitative evidences.
Okay, thank you, sir. We have here from Celsius or Sir Celsius Wachon, sorry. Sir, in simple time series design, are there limits on the number of observations that can be done for the second series?
There is no limit in terms of observation in the time series design that can be done for the second series. Almost the same naman in terms of the observation, but the treatment itself have different. Kasi pwede mangyari isang treatment wala. Isa sa control group wala.
Okay, sir. Sorry, medyo nagkaroon lang ng problema dito with the connection. I think it would be ideal also for us to cater the last two questions appearing here in slido.com. We have another question from Jackie from WIT Iloilo. From the sample study presented, was the use of TVL students for CAM provided more statistically correct inferences than the use of STEM or GAS students?
Okay. Why I utilize or go for the TVL? Because the seriousness of the problem is to strengthen the laboratory experience and the difficulties of the students in terms of TBL, laboratory experience. Most of my students have a problem in laboratory, but STEM and GAS have good in terms of laboratory experience. So that I consider the TVL because in my classroom, I always utilize experiential learning. Kasi di naman natin malalaman that the TVL can be utilized in their action, in their research in terms of experimental research, experimental dish. Kasi one of my requirements in physical science is experimental dishes.
Okay, thank you, sir. We have here from statistical a question. We ensure that the two groups are homo. Okay, so on statistical equivalence, we ensure that the two groups are homogeneous before we start the experiment. How do we randomize so we can hypothesize? What do you think of that, sir?
Most of the time in statistical equivalence, we need to, the participants are homogeneous in nature. Then you can randomize that based on the criteria of your study. Kasi we need, I forgot to share with you the randomized mobile application for higher experimental research. There is an application. I will share it to you. Ay kay sir, yung randomized tool for homogeneous participants or subject. There is a tool for that na hindi na ang researcher maghihirap kasi you need to have same characteristics.
Ujo.
Sana. Si Amir.
Ujo, please, Sir Casilla.
Wala.
Nakamute po si Sir Jose.
Sige po, ako
Sir,
na lang
nakamute
magsasagot.
Nakamute ka po, Sir
Good thing in
Casilla.
all experiment, in all experiment designs, there is a required number of participants. Yes, some authors, some roosters in research have criteria in terms of number of participants or subject. Example, most of the time in experimental research required 15 subjects per group or 30 subject per group most of the time in some authors.
Okay, sorry, I accidentally muted myself here. We have here Ma'am Gilda M. Romano. She's raising her hand a while ago, and I think it would be ideal for us to cater the question of Ma'am Gilda. Ma'am Gilda, again, I would like you to introduce yourself first, the institution where you are affiliated with, and your question.
Okay po, so good morning. I'm Hilda M. Romano from University of Rizal System. So ang question ko lang po sir ay about dun sa pag-descriptive po ba ay ang conceptual model po ba na ginagamit ay pwede bang palitan yung comms? Yung input, process, and output?
If it is descriptive research, ma'am, remember the conceptual framework are most of the time, some of university and colleges utilize IPO most of the time. But you can create your conceptual framework is your own framework of your study based on your ability to create a framework of your research. Because it is your research, you can create your own framework. Kasi most of the time, there are some institutional format in terms of conceptual framework. Kasi for me, as a researcher, ang ginagawa ko I created my own conceptual framework. Madalas nga ang ginagamit ko conceptual framework, may action research, mga cartoons, nagdo-drawing ako, then from that drawing or from that pictures, they can explain how research are undergo, implemented, and what will be the output. Remember that the conceptual framework right now have different have their own taste based on research expert, based on research ability. But most of the time, some institution IPO.
Okay po sir, thank you po.
Okay, again, thank you, Ma'am Gilda M. Romano. We have here another question appearing in Slido. Sir, what experimental design is appropriate if there are small number of students or participants?
Ayun, kamukha ng ginawa ko kasi 30 lang yung participants ko Sila lang talaga yung pumasok dun sa criteria ko so that I utilize one group pretest-posttest design. Pero pwede ako mag-quasi if more than 30 ang aking participants. Pwede ako mag-quasi experimental. But we need to consider kasi if the students are willing to join to your study so that you consider also this one. Kasi madalas may mga estudyante talaga that are not willing to undergo with your research. So that we need also to consider your experimental research design that are applicable to your research based on the number of participants.
Okay, sir. Does it mean po ba, sir, like the more number of participants na qualifying to the criteria you provided, the higher the validity of the results? Napapasok po ba yun?
Kasi sir, pwede naman sir in terms of the validity naman ng number of participants. Okay naman siya sir. Example, kung umabot siya sa 30. Kung 30 lang talaga participants mo sir, wala ka talaga magawa, okay naman siya. Kasi some authors are requiring 30 participants
Okay.
per group. But maliit lang yung 30 so that we need to strengthen the validity of your instrument, the validity of your data gathering procedure, the literature and study that you're going to cite, also the strategic, the materials that your innovation that you're going to implement, and also the support of the expert in terms of the validity and reliability of your instrument and your innovation. You can strengthen that by using that to strengthen your research po.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think it would be ideal for us to cater last 2 questions. We will have here a question from Celsius Wachon and a question from Sir Roger Berganyo. Let's have here Sir Roger Berganyo first. Sir, good morning. Is the application you have shared also usable or appropriate for data analysis of field experimental study? Thank you po.
Yes po. Remember that the application that I introduced to you are licensed. These are licensed applications.
Okay. Nagpa-follow up question kanina. Sir, follow-up question po. What about if the participant is below 30, like for example, 14 students only? What is your stand on that, sir?
Kasi the required number of participants per group is 15 Kailangan mag-iba ka ng research design kapag ganyan. Kasi kailangan 15 is the minimum requirements for the participants of the study.
Okay.
Minimum 15. 15 talaga. Most of the researchers 15.
Okay, again, that speaks about the confirmation coming from Sir Resty. And finally, sir, let's say some other variables, extraneous or confounding, appear in the process of experimentation. What advice can you give?
What types of experimentation ba? Or what particular sir? Can I talk to Sir Celsius so that kasi magkaiba kasi ang tingin diyan depending on type of research talaga.
If Sir Celsius is here with us, it would be ideal for him to provide us additional context for his question here. Sir Celsius,
sir,
are you with us?
Good morning.
Yes, sir. Good morning.
And good morning po to our speaker. Sir, let's say in an action research, sir, yung intervention po sa action research.
In your action research.
Yes, sir. Intervention po.
Intervention. May anong mga, sir, for example, what types of confounding variables that you observe, sir, so that I can confirm some of my comment po kasi I'm also an action researcher.
Yes pa. Very nice, sir. So kunyari po, sir, yung age, hindi po siya yung
okay. Yeah, okay. Remember the basic principle of process of examination, experimentation, age, gender, kailangan mawala yon. Kailangan mawala yung mga confounding principles na yan. Kaya most of my participants, kung babae lang. Kaya medyo ganun ang consideration. Kung age ang pinag-uusapan, kailangan the same ang age. Talaga, homogeneous talaga sila.
Okay, sir. Thank you po. Malaking tulong po yan sa
pero
action
kasi
research.
Sir, may mga kino-consider pa rin naman tayo. If you have, example, may mga participants ka na medyo may iba lang ng konti. May isang age na, kunyari may 5 na 17, tapos yung iba ay 18. Hanap ka lang ng literature that supports your study. Kasi minsan pwede naman yun. Pero kailangan ma-elaborate in the scope and the limitation of your study.
Doon po i-declare para naka-account po, sir.
Kailangan kasi may consideration ka rin sa literature kasi medyo malaki kasi ang epekto ng age talaga at gender.
Apa.
Pero kung iyan ay descriptive in nature, wala tayong kino-consider dyan.
Apa, sir,
Pero kapag
kasi may
experiment
intervention. Apa.
Kapag experiment kasi medyo mahirap. Kaya
Thank you, sir.
I suggest kung iyan ay test of materials ba yan?
Ano po, sir? Actually, learning intervention.
I go for descriptive evaluation research design.
Okay. Descriptive na lang,
The best
sir.
suited. Huwag ka na mag-experimental. Descriptive evaluation research design. Descriptive evaluation research design is a design to evaluate the practices, innovations, program, policies of an institution. Pwede yun. Medyo hawig lang siya sa experimental kasi sa experimental kasi we have a consideration in terms of the participants, randomization, random assignment, but descriptive evaluation, iba.
Apa.
Okay,
Sir,
there
maraming
you have it
salamat
again,
po.
Sir
Maraming
Mark.
salamat
Thank
po.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome, sir. Again, thank you also to Sir Resty. And that ends our question and answer portion. We will try to reply to some of your queries, especially to those questions appearing here in the early part of our discussion. We will have the profile or email of Sir Resty also be forwarded to us, especially if you have additional queries or questions that he would like you to cater. Okay, let us proceed now to the giving of certificate. PISI 21, Philippine Institute of 21st Century Educators Incorporated, Zaraga, Iloilo, Philippines, awards this Certificate of Recognition to Professor Resty C. Samosa for imparting his invaluable time, resources, and expertise as resource speaker on the topic Recalibrating Research for the New Normal using Experimental Design during the conduct of National Virtual Conference for Research with the theme Retooling Research Skills for Professional Credibility and Integrity in the Academe, accorded the 17th day of July 2021 via Zoom video conferencing, live streamed on POMMI YouTube channel and PISI 21 Facebook page. Signed, Ricky A. Kibinko, MAT MLPT, Virtual Conference Director. Signed, Emijan P. Indonila Palmani, MEd LPT, National President, PISI 21. Again, guys, a virtual applause, round of applause to Professor Resty Samosa for making this session a successful one. Okay? Again, sir, see you hopefully face-to-face na at wala ng COVID so that we are again together in a bigger venue at mas maraming tao. So, before we finally close our morning session, let me read to you some announcements. To earn a certificate of participation, you must sign up the evaluation or attendance form that are posted in Zoom, in our Facebook page, and our YouTube channel in POMMI. We have those who are already asking about the evaluation link that they cannot access. We actually have a link also forwarded to you ahead together with your Zoom link. Okay, the certificate of participation and the PDF copy of Professor Samosa's presentation will be sent to your respective email right after this event upon verification of your attendance. Now, may I request everyone to kindly open your camera for a quick photo op with our speaker. I would like now the technical team to facilitate. We only have one topic left, and we will have another speaker who will talk to us about a newer topic, which is also very significant. And one of the goals of this organization is to see the members and the participants, obviously, to publish a research or to come up with their own research. And the discussion about publication is our discussion in the afternoon. See you 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. this afternoon. Okay, can we have now the technical team, please?
Okay, so we have 9 panels. Okay, so please keep smiling kasi hindi natin alam kung saan tayong panel na belong. So Sa panel 1, so ready 1, 2, 3, and smile. Okay, panel 2. So 1, 2, 3, and smile. Panel 3. So 1, 2, 3, and smile. Okay, so panel 4. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and smile. So panel 5. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, and smile. Okay, so panel 6. 1, 2, 3, and smile. 7, 1, 2, 3, and smile. So 8, 1, 2, 3, and smile. And last panel, 1, 2, 3, and smile. Okay, so congratulations.
Sir Jose, nakamute po kayo.
We have those who are asking questions here about the certificates, and we have those na may mga corrections sa mga pangalan. Kindly again, message the official page, or you may send it to our email. Okay, I will be informing you and provide you additional clarification in the afternoon, especially to those who are also asking questions about how to get membership ID sa mga organizations meron tayo dito. Again, stay safe everyone. God bless and congratulations.
Thank you po.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Thank you po.
Thank you po.
Salamat po.
Thank you.
Ay, okay.
Thank you po.
Thank you.
Salamat din po. We have those who are asking questions about yesterday afternoon daw. Wala pa pong certificate. We were able to send already certificates. Certificate of participation to those who were able to attend the session. Morning and the afternoon session. Again, to those who are not able to receive,